Oh, howdy y'all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some action RPG discussion. I played Diablo 4 so that you don't have to. A new Diablo game should be a big deal for anyone interested in action RPGs. Diablo 1 came out in 1997, one of the best years ever in the gaming industry. You had Final Fantasy VII taking JRPGs into a new era, you had Ultima Online launching the start of the MMORPG genre, and you had GoldenEye on the N64, you had Fallout. This was a magnificent year for gaming in general. And yet Diablo 1 was a strong contender for the best game of that year, and it came to define a new genre. And while the sequel in 2000 I don't think has aged all that well, it was an absolute masterpiece that took the ARPG genre leaps and bounds forward. So a new Diablo game should be a big deal. But Blizzard of 2023 is not the same Blizzard North that made the first two games, and it really shows. This is a game that does have its high points, but it has a lot of issues and one absolute killer flaw. And while I went in with low expectations, I did decide I wanted to be fair and assess the game on its own merits and not many of the serious issues around the publisher or around Diablo Immortal. So I wanted to be as fair as I could, and that's what I've aimed to do. All my opinions are based on playing in the Server Slam test event, which gives access to Act 1. For those of you familiar with PathOfExile, Act 1 in Diablo 4 is quite a lot more gameplay than you get in Act 1 of PathOfExile. I think it's more comparable to say it's everything up to and including the first labyrinth in PathOfExile. I played a Druid, which I later discovered is considered one of the two genuinely weak classes in the beta, and I played on medium difficulty settings, which meant the softcore rule set with World Tier 2, which is the setting that's recommended to veterans of Diablo games. Now, difficulty early on was too easy, probably patronizingly so. It's like the game is telling you, I think you're really stupid, so I'm going to put you against a whole lot of really weak monsters. But it does ramp up, and it does seem like towards the end of Act 1, with the rule set that I was talking about, it seemed to be roughly as described, suitable for veterans of Diablo games from about level 15 onwards. So firstly, the good. In the background, you can see me battling the Act 1 boss on veteran difficulty. This fight was a very long battle for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the Druid is weak in beta. Secondly, I hadn't had a weapon upgrade for a while, and the way that itemization in Diablo 4 works is that basically other upgrades don't matter very much, but your weapon is everything. And this fight, as a result, took a very long time. I timed my kill, and it was 14 minutes and 17 seconds, and my failed attempt that led up to the successful kill was 11 minutes 42. So I was fighting this guy for a long time, and I was never bored during it. A good deal of this was kiting to very slowly recover hit points, because your in-combat life recovery is extremely limited in D4. Basically, you get 10 life flask uses, 4 at the start of the fight, and it seems you can upgrade to beyond 4, and then 2 new ones each time you knock the boss below certain HP thresholds. Higher DPS, which was really just one weapon upgrade away, just a weapon upgrade that I didn't get, would have changed this a lot, as the next HP threshold would be closer, which means that I could play more risky and use my life flasks to get through. But that wasn't an option with the items that dropped for me. That said, while the boss fight was long, it did not outstay its welcome. This was a really good fight, and you were constantly dodging things that were interesting to dodge, and then trying to find a way to sneak in and drop down your big cooldown skills and do some damage. And ultimately, that was the high point of the experience for me. But now the bad. Firstly, we've got to start with the small things, like navigation. What on earth is the map in this game? The main view is zoomed in way too far, so you have to use the minimap frequently to navigate. But the minimap is also zoomed in too far, so you have to refer to the full screen map. So you're basically walking through a zone, and then you're pressing M to bring up a full screen map. And then you're looking at that for a second, working out where you got to go, and then you're trying to implement that on the actual game itself. This was really bad, and you'll be doing this constantly because virtually every zone is at least a partial maze. There's also the press space to pass hazards that are too common and don't really add anything to the game. They're not particularly engaging. The only time that they really impact your playthrough is when you find that on the other side there's a huge ambush of enemies waiting for you. In that situation they're impactful, but otherwise they just don't do very much, and there's just too many of them. Okay, so we need to talk about fetch quests. One thing that was really noticeable when you're running through the campaign in Act 1 of Diablo 4 is that everything seems to be a fetch quest of some version. Either it is meet me at A, or it is go and get this MacGuffin and bring it back to me, or it is go and talk to this other person then return to me, or it's some version of that fundamental gameplay loop. Travel to position X, do something, then travel back to me. There's a lot of this that's going on, and ultimately it gets old really quickly. What really interested me though was when I was thinking about this, I started thinking, well, actually, more that I think about that, the more true that is of Path of Exile as well. Why have I never noticed, through literally dozens of playthroughs of the campaign in Path of Exile, that it's fetch quest, fetch quest, fetch quest? And the reason is that in Path of Exile, excluding really the back end of Act 7, which is a bit of an exception to this, you are continually going from one tile set to another, and those new tile sets are very different to each other. They have different packs of monsters attacking you. They feel like you are in a new area. In Diablo 4, your fetch quests will often be within one particular zone. Or if they do traverse from one zone to another, they don't traverse many zones, and the time that you spend in each zone is considerable, and the zones are quite similar to each other. This is the reason that Path of Exile can get away with having these fetch quests, and it doesn't feel bad, but in Diablo 4, oh god, they feel awful. So the next issue with the game is the pacing issues. Now, I have no, in principle, opposition to slow-paced games. I regard Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger, and Secret of Mana as among the best games of my teenage years in the 1990s, and all three of them are slow-paced. And while I don't recommend the game anymore, I used to love EVE Online, which is almost turn-based as well. But Diablo 4 has this weird mixture of fast and slow. At least on the Druid, when you can survive at point-blank range against monsters, gameplay is fast, smooth, and responsive. But as soon as you face a real challenge, you have to start kiting and relying upon safer-to-use skills. These skills have big cooldowns. We're talking cooldowns that in a game like World of Warcraft would be normal, but in a game like Diablo 4 that's much faster paced, just don't fit at all. So 15, 18, even 20-second cooldowns on skills just really feel weird in the context of an ARPG. And then you have to travel from pack to pack and objective to objective over the overworld map. The areas are large mazes, and traversing them simply isn't fun. It's like the developers took design notes from the last half of Act 7 in Path of Exile, which is my least favourite part of the game, and then decided to remove Quicksilver flasks and all movement speed boots. And towns are even worse. End-to-end walking through the Act 1 capital feels like it takes about 45 seconds. Now, this is a pace akin to the very slowest non-combat zones in some of those 1990s JRPGs I was talking about, things like the Water Palace in Secret of Mana or South Figaro in Final Fantasy VI. These were zones that dragged in the 90s when games were slower. Now, it's the 2020s, and games generally do tend to be faster, and also it's an ARPG, a genre that tends to be much faster. One of the things that Path of Exile gets right is that the towns, you don't need to spend much time in them. You might need to go and talk to an NPC, but doing that is quick, especially if it's not your first playthrough. It feels like a lot of these design decisions around space were made so that they can force mounts into a game that they don't belong in and that they're bad for. So either horses and other mounts allow you to reliably traverse areas that are full of monsters, in which case those areas just need to be smaller so you can traverse them without the horses, or the horses don't allow bypassing monsters, in which case all a horse does is basically let you navigate town faster. Neither of these is satisfying, and both of these could be addressed either by increasing player out-of-combat move speed to the sorts of levels that a mount might provide, or alternately reducing the amount of space that you've got to traverse in the game. And if it's bad to walk forwards through a zone, it is much worse to walk backwards through a zone, especially when your only form of acceleration is a 5-second cooldown movement skill that doesn't particularly do all that much for you speed-wise. Now, the next issue is one I see a lot of people talking about, and having played with this, I actually don't think this is particularly bad. There is a lack of agency in Diablo 4 over who you play with. So leveling up in many ways is similar to the feel in World of Warcraft. People that are not in your party will impact you in various ways. You'll be running towards a monster, and someone else will go and kill it first. Now, this sounds more annoying than it is, and in my opinion, it played fine in practice during the context of the stress test. Major story beats occur in instances, so it's not like you're going to be distracted while a major story beat is going on, but I do think this will be infuriating at the start of a new season, when all of the quite fast players, like the sort of quite experienced players, not necessarily the very best, but people who know the game well, these people are all going to be in the same few zones at the same time, and it's going to get really old having your kills stolen there. Other than that though, I don't think it's going to be a problem. I do think, however, it'll be much more frustrating if at endgame players disgorge distracting or performance killing levels of particles, like they do in Path of Exile. This isn't the Blizzard norm, however, and Blizzard do have a lot of experience and a proven track record of managing to keep this sort of stuff under control in most circumstances. So I do think this is a common criticism that I don't think I necessarily agree with yet, although of course if you play the game more, you might end up finding that it gets worse. So that's some minor issues, but now let's talk about the fundamental design flaw with this game. This is the one design decision that was made in Diablo 4 that basically renders the game not worth playing. And that is that when you level up, you get a small character power boost, but every monster in the game levels up as well, and they gain more power than you do. Contrast this to, say, PathOfExile's campaign. If you're dying too much in the level 65 Ruined Square zone, you've got the agency to go back to the level 62 Foothills and grind some levels, grind some better gear there. Or you can go to the level 60 Harbour Bridge, and you can grind some levels, grind some gear there. And if you're playing in Trade League there, you can also grind for various currency orbs that you can then use to purchase upgrades from other players. In either case, you've got the option to go back to an earlier part of the game to improve your character to the point that you can then come back and beat the part you're having trouble with. In short, you have agency over the challenge you face. Now, veteran players in PathOfExile don't actually use this agency, but they've got the option. And rookie players generally do it without even really thinking about it. They're like, oh, I'm struggling with this zone. Maybe the game is telling me I'm not powerful enough yet. Maybe I should go and kill some more monsters and get more powerful. Now, if you were to try this in Diablo 4, what's going to happen is that the Foothills, the Harbour Bridge, and all the other earlier zones you might have thought of going to will be boosted to your new level, to the same level as the Ruined Square, the area that you can't beat. And these will also grind you into the dirt. I see what Diablo 4 is trying to achieve here. It's trying to give you agency over where you play, which zone you're playing in, by ensuring that whatever your favourite zone ends up being, it's a relevant level for you. But what it actually achieves is destroying agency over the challenge you face and making you dread every level up. And this is just an unacceptable price for the game to pay here. This design decision means that Blizzard have to choose a single group of players, a single skill level, and cater the difficulty curve to them. So do they cater the difficulty to suit the casual player that's playing while distracted and multitasking? Do they cater the difficulty curve for the casual player that is giving the game their full attention? Do they cater for the experienced gamer that is multitasking on the side? Do they cater for the experienced player that is giving the game their full attention? Or do they cater for the very best players? Well, ultimately, you got to make a choice, and it seems like the choice they've made is somewhere between the gaming veteran that's multitasking and the gaming veteran that's giving full attention, at least if you play on World Tier 2 as I was. If you play on World Tier 1, it's likely to be quite a bit easier than that. And you wind up in a situation where if you fit that difficulty curve, well, actually the game is going to always be right for you. It's always going to be the difficulty in the Goldilocks zone. But if you don't fit that difficulty curve, then you're either going to find it always too easy or always too hard. And things are going to spiral because the less powerful your character is, the less you're going to be able to kill the tougher monsters, and the tougher monsters seem to be the ones that drop the loot that will actually upgrade your character's power. So you end up in this really awful situation where if you fall behind the power curve, you're in a downward spiral. You can only kill the weaker monsters because your gear is bad, and every weak monster that you kill will punish you with more experience points, digging you further into the hole you're in. I want to compare this a little bit to World of Warcraft, at least in the era that I played it, which was from the very end of the Burning Crusades expansion through to Mists of Pandaria mostly. Now in World of Warcraft, you noticed each level up severely reduced your chance to critically strike and severely reduced your attack and cast speed. And this was especially notable in the Cataclysm expansion. I don't know if it's still the case now, but what was happening here was that the gear that you had from the previous expansion would not give you a percentage chance to critically strike or a percentage increase on your attack and cast speed. It would instead provide you with a haste rating and a crit rating. And this haste and crit rating would be compared to your level, and that would determine how much of the raw critical strike it would give you, or the raw attack speed or cast speed. And then this formula would change every time you leveled up. So if you went +1 level, then your haste rating would start giving you less attack speed per point of haste rating that you had. And so this meant that you would feel like your character was weakening in some aspects. But broadly speaking, your character still felt like it was getting more powerful every time you leveled up. Yeah, you lost some of your attack speed, your cast speed, and your critical strike chance, but you were picking up more base damage, you were picking up new skills, and you were picking up more life. In Diablo 4, every time you level up, it feels like a power loss. You start noticing that the monster that used to take you 3 seconds to kill is now taking you 4.5 seconds to kill. You start noticing that the monster that you used to be able to take 17 hits from is now going to be able to kill you in 13. All these things are happening at the same time, and suddenly you need to use your big cooldown skills in a larger percentage of fights, until of course you get improved gear, which can then address some of these issues. So that's the single biggest issue with Diablo 4 at the moment. It's that level scaling. But it is such a serious issue that I'm willing to say that if it is not rectified, and I don't see how it's going to be rectified this close to release, then it's going to basically kill the game off. That said, let's talk about some of the other things. And I want to talk about the storyline because I've seen people praising it and I just got Game of Thrones Season 8 vibes from it. I'll explain that in a sec. So you have a really richly detailed and interesting world that's going on, some fascinating conflicts that are taking place. Lilith is introduced early and she's introduced well, and it looks like there's an archangel that's being built up as a secondary antagonist as well. All of these things are fantastic. This is the background. This is being done amazingly. Then you have characters that are being built up as intelligent, who the plot requires to do completely and utterly irrational things. You've got a mother that's torn between her two loves, pursuit of knowledge on the one hand and her teenage daughter on the other. She's forced to choose between them, and she chooses knowledge. And okay, this is your classic example of a bad decision that's being made, but under unusual circumstances, this isn't one of the real problems yet. She chooses knowledge, she betrays the daughter, and then she tries to kill both your player and the daughter when you try to stop her from using some horrendous blood ritual. And then you have the total Daenerys moment. The daughter's continuing loyalty to the mother who died trying to kill her because the plot needs you, the player, to complete the blood ritual you had just prevented the mother from casting. And then that takes you and the daughter off looking for a way to resurrect the mother. And I'm just head scratching at this point. I'm like, what on earth is going on here? Like, these characters are just so inconsistent. One thing you often see in amateur writing is characters that have inconsistent or nonsensical motivations, but you don't often see it in multi-million-dollar productions. Definitely seen it in Season 8 of Game of Thrones, definitely seen it in Act 1 of Diablo 4. Really, I was surprised by that. I was expecting that Blizzard would nail the story, and I really don't think they did at all. Okay, the next problem. Gear is boring. So this is based on the early game. Endgame might be better. But early gearing in PathOfExile is flexible and it's varied. In Diablo 4, one item slot matters far more than anything else. Your weapon. You don't seem to get damage anywhere else, and the flask system ensures that killing monsters or dropping bosses below various health thresholds is basically mandatory for life sustain. If RNG frowns upon you in the weapon slot, then you're in for a bad time. Defensive gear in other slots just seems uninspired and inflexible. You can raise its quality, which just increases all of its stats by a percentage, but if you identify a specific weakness on your character, the solution is never, I can address this by modifying my existing gear, or I can address this by crafting a specialized solution. The solution isn't even change to a new item that addresses this specific weakness. The solution is instead get new gear that has higher numbers. This is basically the state of gear so far in Diablo 4. I've got nothing really good to say about it. It feels like World of Warcraft gearing, but not World of Warcraft gearing as it was early in World of Warcraft's life when there was a lot of interesting choices to be made. Not World of Warcraft's gearing with the trinket slot when there were a number of interesting choices, at least when I used to play. Instead, it's World of Warcraft as it was the last time I came back to it around Legion era, where it was just every time you can get a higher item level in a slot, that's going to be what you want. And then when you've got choice between two different items of the same item level, it doesn't really matter that much which one you choose. One will be better than the other, but it's not a big enough difference to really matter all that much. So yeah, gear so far is boring. Finally, we'll turn to the ugly, and that is the question of monetization. Monetization looks okay at the moment. So Diablo 4 at release is a box price plus microtransactions plus cosmetic battle pass system. But there are a few concerning things that are on the horizon here. So firstly, this is the same IP as Diablo Immortal. Diablo Immortal is an example of a game that should be regulated not as an online game, but as an online gambling product. Now this doesn't mean that Diablo 4 is necessarily bad in the same ways, but it does mean that where you might give the benefit of the doubt to another game, you won't give it to Diablo 4 because you know that the publisher has history of putting out this sort of rubbish in the past. So that's the first thing that makes me a little bit nervous there. The second thing is that there is a paid 4-day head start in the higher tier pre-order packs. Now this is one of those cases where the question of benefit of the doubt comes up. There are three possible explanations for this 4-day head start. The first one is that Blizzard decided we're going to throw a bit of a party for the people who are our VIP customers and give them something a little bit special that's worth spending a little bit more to be a part of. Kind of like a meet and greet at a concert. The second possibility is that Blizzard decided, right, we think that there is a section of our player base that are keen to buy gold and cheat that way, and the way that we're going to cater to them is by making this 4-day head start as a way for them to get an economic boost over everyone else in the game. Everyone that wants to be part of endgame trading is going to feel compelled to buy one of the higher tiers, and as a result we'll get more money from them than we otherwise would. And the third possible explanation, is that Blizzard know that this is a paid advantage and they just want to normalize tricky ways to put paid advantages into the game. I do not know which of these three it is, and I want you to make up your own mind based upon the past history of this intellectual property and based upon the past history of the company that is publishing it. Do you trust the integrity of Activision Blizzard and the Diablo IP? If the answer is yes, then go ahead and treat it as though it is the first of these three options. If the answer is no, then you're probably going to be looking at the second and third. Ultimately, we're not going to know what the real answer is. We can only hypothesize based on the information that's available to us, but this is something that is, if not a red flag for the game, a bit of an orange flag when it comes to the questions of paid cheating. World of Warcraft used to ban credit card cheaters outright. Then the same Blizzard started sanctioning gold selling in that game, firstly through cash store mounts that were sellable on the game's auction house, and then later through the WoW token. Thirdly, there's a couple of reservations I have around the Battle Pass system, specifically the accelerated Battle Pass and the 20 Battle Pass skips option in the top pre-order pack. Now, these look like they're there as something that will establish a precedent of allowing small cheat codes to be sold, although precise Battle Pass details that are not available yet will be needed in order to be certain. Blizzard say there's safeguards where the in-game power items won't be able to be gained early, so a person who doesn't purchase the accelerated Battle Pass will have the same access to these items as a person who does purchase it, but I don't know whether that's true or not, and honestly, I will let you make up your own mind as to whether you trust the word of the people who put out Diablo Immortal. Basically, there is no smoking gun of catering to credit card cheaters, nothing like there was in Diablo 3 at first release or Diablo Immortal. But there are reasons to be concerned here. Centrally, the history of both the IP and the company, but also some of the things that they seem to be establishing as just minor precedents down that route. So what are my final thoughts? Diablo 1 and Diablo 2 were masterpieces. Diablo 4 is not. Diablo 4 does not look like it is ready for release at the moment. Diablo 4 does not look like it is the competition that PathOfExile so desperately needs. I am hoping that Last Epoch manages to keep coming forward, as I've heard it has been, and that we will see a serious competitor for PathOfExile in the future. But at the moment, I think that for a lot of people, Diablo 4 is going to be in this awkward spot where it's halfway between World of Warcraft and an ARPG, but it doesn't have enough World of Warcraftiness to appeal to people who love World of Warcraft, and it doesn't have enough ARPG-ness to appeal to people who like ARPGs. I don't really understand who this game's target audience is at the moment. All I can say is, it's definitely not me. That's all I got on this. Hopefully if you do decide to play Diablo 4, you find it's more fun than I did.